Hey, I want to thank you for joining me for this week's special episode of the strange and unexplained phenomena of the South Mountains of North Carolina. I am your host, Kaiser Rebel. Let's get started immediately, if not sooner. Not going to do the ghost stories this week. We're going to push that out a week because, let me explain, I had the privilege this past weekend of being part of groups that investigated and explored an area that has become known as a hotspot in terms of cryptid, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Nobby, whatever you want to call the phenomena, sightings, evidence found, vocalizations reported, in that type of thing. Now, this area that I'm speaking of was under observation this weekend for a little more than 40 hours. That's a remarkable time period to have an area under observation. So tonight I'm going to share with you our experiences and our findings. And it is my intent to present these things to you, and I assure you they're 100% truthful. There's no embellishment. There's no dramatization. Now, you interpret these things as you see fit and decide for yourself. You do some critical thinking and analysis and draw your own conclusions. And wherever you wind up, on one side, the other, or in the middle, please comment. I want to hear from folks. All I ask is be nice. Now, Friday night, some guys from Dirty South Squatching came in, top-notch investigators, and set up a listening post and observation post and high-end equipment. I think in the future we'll hear more about that part of it later. However, Sunday morning, I had the privilege of meeting with investigator Tim Deals out of the Big Mountains of North Carolina, and investigator and author George Lunsford, also from up in the Big Mountains. We call them the Big Mountains here in the Foothills. These guys are members of NCI, North Carolina Investigates, and I am privileged to report that I am a part of that group as well. And we stepped out in the wilderness that morning about 9:30 a.m. We had a chance to meet up with the Dirty South Squatching guys, and I and Tim am also members of that group. And our destination, after we exchanged some information with the two Dirty South Squatching investigators, our destination was the first of 3 deer kill sites. And along the way, we discovered a possible footprint in the middle of a sandbar in the creek. We'll call that one undetermined, but possible. We discovered numerous tree breaks. We discovered evidence of ambush sites. And I only have 10 minutes, but an ambush site can be set up by funneling game into a kill zone, into a funnel. And you can study. Mankind has used that hunting method for a long time. But there's evidence that cryptids do it as well. We discovered structures, that is, trees and sticks and things positioned in such a way that it just appears to be highly unlikely that it was just happenstance. That's the subject for a whole nother episode, something you can study up on your own. But we reached the first kill site. And I had already seen this kill, but both Tim Deals and George Lunsford had not, and I wanted them to see it. The ribs on this deer were obviously fractured, severely fractured, multiple ribs. Not gnawed on by animals at the time of death, but fractured. The neck appeared to be twisted. It didn't appear to be twisted. It was twisted. It was in an unnatural position, and it appeared as though the deer had been taken down with such force that the head was twisted up and backwards. But even more alarmingly, one of the back legs was snapped. One theory is, and what the evidence suggested, is that was the means of incapacitation. So we duly noted those things, the tree breaks, the ambush sites, the structures, and most definitely this deer kill. And we left out en route to kill site or kill area number 2. We crossed into a small mucky area where a small creek and a medium creek converge. And in this mucky area, we found several footprints. But one footprint in particular was pristine. And after some analysis and extrapolation, it would appear that the individual that made this footprint would weigh a little around 550 pounds, and that's based on how deep my footprint was impressed beside of it versus how deep it was. Now, in kill area number 2, these were older kills, multiple kills, and very little is left of those kills. Not much for George and Tim to be able to see and gain a whole lot from, but I could just give them my description because I had seen several of the kills fresh back last year. And then we went to kill site number 3. We found the deer, and only half of it was accounted for. The back part of the spine and the pelvis was there. One leg was there. The front part of the spine and the head and the other legs were completely missing. Then something was noticed up in a small holly tree, about 7.5 feet up. And it was the front spine area, the rib area, or what was left of the ribs, and the top part of the cervical vertebrae, to include part of the skull still being attached to the spinal column. Just a small area of the skull, as the skull had been crushed or ripped away. We know that it was violently taken away from the rest, or taken apart from that carcass. Then we found a jawbone, the jawbone of the deer, we presume this deer, hanging in a small tree. Very deliberately placed there, in my opinion. And as another sign that something was marking this area, we found 2 tree breaks right there at the kill site. Areas that it appeared something large had possibly bedded down. And we spent a good bit of time there investigating it and looking at everything, trying to put together the theories. But there's no doubt there had the crushed, broken ribs, was torn apart, the head was gone, and the head was obviously, the skull was destroyed at some point. At minimum, it was violently detached from the spinal column, so much so that it left part of the skull cap attached to the spine. And having noted all of that, that part of the investigation was over, and we headed back up out of the woods. Now, that evening, about 5 o'clock, some new folks came in, and I joined them for an overnight campout. And I'll talk to you about the overnight campout in part 2 of this episode. I'll see you in a minute.